It's fairly well established that Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia is a partisan hack masquerading as a principled conservative. And today we have some more evidence of this. So for those of you who don't know, the Supreme Court recently heard another Obamacare case about whether or not the subsidies from the federal government are constitutional. And during the arguments, Scalia said this, quote, What about Congress? You really think Congress is just going to sit there while all of the disastrous consequences ensue? I mean, how often have we come out with a decision such as the bankruptcy court decision? Congress adjusts, enacts a statute that takes care of the problem. It happens all the time. Why is that not going to happen here? So, in other words, let me explain what that means. What he's saying is, if this court and if I decide to strike down the rest of Obamacare, all the provisions of Obamacare, well, we shouldn't worry, because then what's going to happen is Congress will step up and they will take care of the roughly 8 million people who are going to lose their health insurance and lose their health care if we do that. So he's saying, don't worry, millions of people will get over it and Congress will step up if we do the wrong thing here. So since Scalia portrays himself as a consistent guy and a principled conservative, if we look back at what he said during the last Obamacare case a few years ago, it'll be the same thing, right? No contradictions here. So he said during the individual mandate case the following, quote, Let's consider how your approach, severing as little as possible, thereby increases the deference that we're showing to Congress. It seems to me it puts Congress in this position. This act is still in full effect. There is going to be this deficit that used to be made up by the mandatory coverage provision. All that money has to come from somewhere. You can't repeal the rest of the act because you're not going to get 60 votes in the Senate to repeal the rest. It's not a matter of enacting a new act. You got to get 60 votes to repeal it. So the rest of the act is going to be the law. See what he said then. See, back during the last case when he was trying to convince everybody, I'm not a bad guy when I smack down only part of the law, his argument was, well, I only want to smack down part of the law and the rest of the law will stand and it'll be okay with just the remaining parts which I don't smack down. So don't worry, if I attack the individual mandate provision, it's okay because Obamacare is going to stay in effect. So I'm not a bad guy, don't worry about it. The rest will still be there. And now he changed his argument again to where he says, well, if I smack down the rest of the law, well, then Congress is going to step in and just do a new law. So before he said, don't worry, we don't need a new law, the rest is going to stand. And now he's saying, you might need a new law because I'm going to smack down the rest of it. So in just a few years, this jackass who claims to be consistent and claims to be principled flipped his position on the constitutionality of Obamacare. Last time he was like, well, just that one provision, the individual mandate is unconstitutional, the rest is fine. Now he's like, well, the individual mandate is unconstitutional and the rest of it is unconstitutional. What happened, buddy? I thought you were consistent. I thought you were principled. I thought you never changed your mind. I thought you never inject your own partisan politics and your own beliefs into a case about the constitutionality of a given subject. That's what he does. I remember back when I was in constitutional law class as a political science major. You have to take all types of classes like that. And I remember we watched this discussion. I think it was between Stephen Breyer and Scalia. It was on C-SPAN, and they showed us, it was like a 2-hour discussion. We watched the tape. Back then we were using tapes. Shows you a little bit how old I am there. And Scalia dragged on and on. Basically, every time he spoke, he made the point that, well, I'm just principled, and I go by the letter of the law of the Constitution, and I never flip my beliefs. I always go by the original intent of the founders and the letter of the law, and that's what I stand for. Whether or not I like it, that's how I rule. I never inject my own beliefs into certain cases. But Breyer does, on the other hand. The liberal justices do. They think the Constitution is a living document, and they're activist judges. Well, look who's activist now, slapstick. But understand, Scalia has never been principled, and Scalia has never actually cared about the idea of interpreting the Constitution by the letter of the law or going by the original intent of the founders, because he changes his mind based on where he falls politically. So, for example, he always talks about states' rights is what the founders wanted. They wanted the federal government to know their role and to let the states be the laboratories of democracy. So, to give an example, when he invoked that idea, look at the Arizona case on immigration. Arizona decided that as a state, they want to basically have their own border patrol and border security policies that in many respects might even contradict the federal law. And Scalia wrote this scathing opinion like, well, if Arizona can't control the border and do what they want, then why do we even have states to begin with? A state should, of course, be allowed to do that because we believe in states' rights. They have the right to do that. The feds need to butt out. But then when you look at the cases involving marijuana, all of a sudden he changes his mind. Instead of writing an opinion about California or Colorado to say, well, let them do what they want. This is states' rights. Let them be the laboratories of democracy. The feds should butt out. You know what he invokes in those cases? The supremacy clause of the Constitution is clear that federal law overrides state law, and the federal government has the right to go in there and crush the marijuana businesses, whether medicinal or otherwise, in all the places where they're doing it. So again, no consistency whatsoever. He's an absolute hypocrite, and he changes his mind based on his own opinions and his own beliefs. But then again, I don't know why anybody expected him to be intelligent in the first place. He's the biggest fraud ever put forth on that court ever. This is a guy who literally used a Rush Limbaugh argument during the oral arguments for the first Obamacare case. I mean, think about how sad that is. Rush Limbaugh was going on and on about how, well, if the Supreme Court can mandate you to buy health insurance, why can't they mandate you to eat broccoli? Scalia made the exact same argument. He didn't even change the food. He didn't even change it to, like, I don't know, fucking celery or carrots or apples. He's like, well, why can't the government force you to use broccoli? I just heard this on Rush. I'm repeating the arguments I heard on Rush. Aren't I a principled conservative? Aren't I an intellectual? No, you're a joke.